Flax, the podcast. Twin Peaks special. In these special episodes, Flo and Max dive deep into the mysterious world of Twin Peaks. From the Black Lodge to damn good coffee. From giants and owls to analyses and interpretations. And even conversations with the original actors. This podcast is not what it seems.
Hello! And welcome back to a podcast both wonderful and strange. Flax from Germany. I am FBI Special Agent Max, and sitting next to me is my personal Albert Rosenfield, the wonderful and mysterious
Flo. In
our second part, we analyze and discuss the second season of Twin Peaks, talk to the giant himself, the personified evil, and especially in these weird times, important character. So grab a plate with a big slice of cherry pie, a huge cup of damn fine black coffee and some donuts, and let's get started. First we can start with a quote from David Lynch.
The pilot is the only thing I'm particularly extremely proud of. There were great moments along the way. The second season sucked. That was the goose that laid the golden eggs. And at that certain point, we were told to wrap that up. And it never really got going after that. I got very stupid and goofy in the second season. It got ridiculous.
Lynch was not involved with the show after Laura's killer was revealed. If even Lynch had this opinion of the second season, what is true about that and what do we think? Okay, what is special and awful about season 2? Something curious about the changes within the series. The original script for the final suggests that the boundaries of time itself may have collapsed. When Cooper enters the Black Lodge, he briefly becomes a child, later meets his old father. But Lynch takes this relatively simple concept and modifies it. Instead, a scene from the pilot is repeated more or less the same in the Double R Diner. Though none of the characters involved seem to know they've said and done these things before.
Lynch has often said that Laura's murder should not be solved, but sometimes he has made the suggestion that the revelation should have come near to the end of the series after all. What is certain in my opinion, or in our opinion, to this day is that for David Lynch, the magic of Twin Peaks depended on the question remaining unanswered, perhaps forever. Frost, however, felt that Laura's murder and the revelation of her killer would not distort the sense of the series and the storylines, so he was willing to give in to the network's demands. Lynch was outvoted. And most importantly, behind the scenes, cast and staff were more and more upset with the direction the series had gone, but especially about the absence of Lynch and Frost. Viewers as well. Twin Peaks lost ratings and viewers at a rapid pace.
And then ABC paused the series, and only through viewer letters it was then shot to the end after all. Mark Frost rejoined the series and Lynch began to advertise for a third season. He was enthusiastic again about a continuation, although he was upset about creative decisions that had been without him. Gordon Cole returned and Lynch himself behind the camera. He even directed the final. He rewrote and reworked many sections of the script. By the end, most of the people involved were exhausted and no longer wanted to be on board. And then there was no plan for a third season. The second season seemed almost like a reboot, not a continuation of the first season's world, rather a new variant. And this new variant is much more versatile. In any case, the second season is often chaotic, but still interesting, because even a weak Twin Peaks is still more fascinating than any average TV series, or as David Lynch said, even bad coffee is no better than coffee at all. In episode 14, Laura's killer is exposed by the murder of Maddie Ferguson, a disturbing and haunting scene for me. During the brutal murder by Leland, the camera cut out some of the main characters at the roadhouse. And we, the viewers, listen in the background to the melancholy and sadness of Julie Crew's The World Spins. Maddie's murder, after Laura was murdered, is a nasty punch to the depths of the Twin Peaks soul.
Yes, it certainly was a heartbreaking moment. Also, Leland being the murderer of his own daughter comes across as a big surprise, but retrospectively, many of his attitudes and his changes begin to make sense. For example, his hair turning white in the season 2 seems to be an indication of Leland being taken over completely by Bob. His whole behavior has always been schizophrenic, and his dance performances throughout the series seem to be the moments in which Bob acts through Leland's body. Bob comes from the Black Lodge, where the music is omnipresent and the characters, especially the man from another place, express themselves through dancing. But like everything in Twin Peaks, this is only an interpretation.
With the scenes in the Black Lodge in the upcoming episodes, the series mutates into a nightmarish trip. Mystical surreality comes up. Cooper's doppelganger, his manifested shadow, was now out of the world, which we can see painfully in the third season. But in the second season, we can already see the hinting of Cooper's dark side and his struggle. Because everyone has a shadow, even Agent Cooper. Jean Reno says in one scene that more people have died since Cooper's arrival than before. Reno embodies the anger that many of the characters secretly feel about Cooper's presence. This fine man and a noble agent of justice should be just disappear. Cooper did not bring the darkness into Twin Peaks. It was there before, but Cooper's arrival has intensified that darkness.
When Cooper physically arrives at the Black Lodge, he reaches the core of the hidden and supernatural world of Twin Peaks, and we see Cooper losing his composure for the very first time. While he always knew what is the right thing to do, he now can't handle the powers he is confronted with. And we as the audience can't process what is happening on the screen, who is who, what is fake, what is real, and what's the point of all this. Let alone you lose sense of space because all rooms look alike, a copy of a copy of a copy. While Cooper's dream of the Red Room in season 1 was just a dream, this is actually a living nightmare.
And that's the perfect point to introduce our first guest. He delivered the message to Agent Cooper, the owls are not what they seem, became one of the most important characters of the series, and is our first guest. The giant and the fireman himself, Carel Struycken. How did you react when David Lynch asked you to play the giant and now the fireman again after more than 25 years? Can you tell us a little bit about how the conversation went, how you were casted, and can you tell us something about the filming of season 1, 2, or 3?
It was a little bit like a slow burn. First there was a rumor, and then the rumor got a bit stronger. And then at a certain point, my agent called me and said that I should keep the first 3 months of the year free. And then finally, I got the call. It wasn't really a conversation. It was more like, are you available then and then and then? And when I said yes, that was it. I was given a few dates and told to show up. And about what I can say, how I was casted. And Joanna Ray was the casting director on all the seasons of Twin Peaks. It was basically just a conversation with her, and David Frost was there. I didn't get to meet David Lynch until my first day of shooting. And I remember that he shook my hand and he said, everything is going to be peachy keen. For me, at least, the difference between the shooting of the first 2 seasons and the number 3, was rather big. The first 2 seasons were really shot very much like a regular TV series. There was a huge soundstage where all the sets were set up permanently. I even got lost in there, and there were always a lot of people present. Season 3, again, at least my experience, it may have been different for others or for other scenes. I was usually on my own or just with a few people, and there was a lot of green screen where I didn't really know where I was supposed to be. So for me, there was a big difference.
What do you think is the meaning of your character in Twin Peaks, and what do you think of your role? Maybe we can solve a mystery with your thoughts.
About my character in the second and the third season. In the second season, I was the giant, and to me, he was somebody who came from another dimension and was trying to kind of coax Agent Cooper to do certain things or to make certain decisions without being too specific about it. Maybe because I didn't want to be responsible for causing another timeline, something like that. And in the third season, it seemed that I had gained some power and that I was I was in the White Lodge and that I was trying to control, keep in check whatever the Black Lodge was planning. And it seemed that I kind of thought Laura Palmer into existence in an effort to change what was happening on Earth. A bit like being in the control room of a power station.
Besides Twin Peaks, you have acted in a wide variety of films, including The Addams Family by Barry Sonnenfeld, Gerald's Game, Star Trek, and many other films. Which of your work was your personal favorite, and do you have a special anecdote that you would like to share with us?
I really don't have a favorite. They were all special to me for different reasons. So I can't really say that much about it. And I also really never have an anecdote to tell. I have a few, but I'm not going to tell them.
People around the world love your work and your role in Twin Peaks. There are cosplays, Funko Pops, and art about you and your character. But you make your own art, photographs. Can you tell us more about your work besides acting?
In the 70s, I was working on a musical feature project with director Renee Dowler, and the project was Population 1. I was, part of my responsibility was figuring out how to do things with, it was a very low budget project, so we had to do everything on a cheap, and how to get a maximum effect for that. So I was constantly looking for ways to have a virtual environment and be able to act in it. And that really didn't exist back then except for blue screen and green screen. But I was more looking for something that you could approach from multiple directions. So when I first heard about spherical panoramas, I realized that that would have been the perfect kind of virtual environment, but it didn't exist yet then. So that's how I got interested in it. And when I started, it was the available tools were still a little bit primitive. I was not the first group of people who started it, but I was kind of the second. You still had to make some of your own equipment. I was just fascinated by the idea of not forcing your view by framing something, but showing an environment that would be interesting no matter where you looked. So I went looking for a lot of those places, and I still looking for those.
What do you think personally about the ending of Twin Peaks: The Return? Many fans were confused about the final. What is your interpretation or thoughts about the ending?
Yeah, I was a little bit confused at first too, but I guess you can see it as everything repeats, everything is circular, and the world has gotten its dose of that in the last few years with all these strange political extremes around us. So yeah, it's we are forced to do the same thing over and over again. It's a little bit like Sisyphus.
There is one thing I can say about this podcast. My socks are on fire. It's very, very good to hear you again, old friends. And now back to Max and Florian for more.
Welcome back. And now for the controversial view. There are too many storylines in the second season that get any approval of various fans and critics. Evelyn Marsh's storyline can best be described as a B-movie film noir subplot. A trapped, sad person and a violent melodrama that eventually results in the science when Malcolm finally kills her. Basically, she's a femme fatale, the mirror to Josie, another plot line that is often not well received. No one really knows Josie, not even herself, because she has created so many identities and masks and webs of betrayal that is impossible to untangle. And another film noir tangle web. The surprising twist when it turns out that Andrew Packard was still alive.
When I think of scenes that left an impression on me, I gotta say all scenes starring Leo Johnson were nerve-wracking. Cause I knew right from the beginning there will be a moment when Leo wakes up from his unconsciousness and attacks Shelley. Most probably when she expects it the least. It felt like karma would punish Shelley and Bobby for becoming so careless and even humiliating to Leo. For example, by dressing him up with a birthday hat. And then there were those close-up shots of Leo's face all the time. And it didn't look like the face of an unconscious man, but of a man who is waiting for the right moment to break out. There was always a lot of tension in the air, and I wanted to tell Shelley and Bobby, just never look away from him. You knew he would become dangerous again, you just didn't know when it happens. That's what you call suspense at its best. And it felt like a torture how long they waited to make Leo break out of his temporary insanity. And then this rebirth was orchestrated so well. Shelley turns around the wheelchair in a fashion of Hitchcock's Psycho, but the chair is empty and Leo appears of the opposite part of the room, still with his birthday hat on his head saying, "Shelley!" And the lights start flickering, building a terrifying setup.
But to another character and huge antagonist, Windom Earle. This one was originally described by Cooper as the personified evil of Twin Peaks, with a razor-sharp mind. Cooper was even afraid to speak out his name, like Voldemort in the Harry Potter series. But what we get at the end, a cackling madman with ridiculous disguises. If you like him, as I do, the character works for you perfect. Windom Earle is the yin to Cooper's yang, a mad genius with no empathy. He just wants pain and confusion. And maybe he finds his disguise ridiculous himself because people believe in these clearly obvious fakes and it amuses him. He's a psychopath and seems like a wild mix of Moriarty, Hannibal Lecter and Dr. Frankenstein. Welsh plays Earle partly in a restrained way, partly like the Joker. After all, his wife and Cooper fell in love and he had let it happen. Now he's obsessed with destroying Cooper. And Leo gets his punishment from Windom Earle too. His purification for what he did to Shelley. He became a servant. First Windom spoke kindly to him and then beaten him up. In parts, Earle is written a little too cartoonish, but he has wonderful disturbing scenes. The impersonation of the log lady to the scenes when the fire bubbles out of his head in the final. I tell you, they have not died. Their hands clasp yours and mine. He fits perfectly into the strange mythology of the series, talking on the part of complete, unbridled madness. Along with forest spirits, government conspiracies, UFOs, cave paintings, black cults and more, Earle is still a slightly normal character in the storyline.
I agree that Windom Earle is a well-written character, violent on a literal and psychological level, thinking of the mind games he played with Cooper, for example with that chess game he played with him via daily newspaper. He's also a badass who knows how to rig others if it's necessary. The way he convinced some of the female characters to join the Miss Twin Peaks competition by sending them beautiful poems is a good example for that. I also fully agree the way he subjected Leo, even if it's cruel, felt satisfying after all what Leo did. Whose development I appreciate a lot is that of Major Briggs in the second season. He was introduced as a strict and patriarchal father, shaped by his military education, who is unable to connect to his son Bobby. In the second season, however, he tells him about a vision he dreamed of, a vision of Bobby's future life, by which he proves he has deep confidence in Bobby and that he's gonna turn into a righteous man. Bobby bursts out in tears, and from that moment on, they both have an intact father-son relationship. Furthermore, Major Briggs make a great contribution in unveiling the secrets of Twin Peaks with his involvement in a project called Blue Book and his search for the White Lodge. Later on, when he is kidnapped by Windom Earle, there's a memorable quote of him that went deep down into my heart. Being asked what is his greatest fear, he answers, the possibility of love is not enough.
Another thing that is crazy, Josie as a drawer knob. My first reaction, what a nonsense. But it's a bit creepy in my opinion to be stuck in a log for all eternity, screaming in all-time existential fear. It fits again, because the log lady also believes her log is alive, and so is Josie in her own way. So is the story about Windom Earle and the Black Lodge a good substitute for the Laura Palmer storyline? That's for everyone to decide. But what we can say, when you look at the whole of season 2, seemingly unrelated storylines are brought together really well in places. Windom Earle only came to town to get revenge on Cooper. Then it turns out he's actually there to look for the entrance of the Black Lodge. But this is a link to the secret research of Major Briggs. Bob, who is beside the murder of Laura Palmer, is from that same lodge. And you see, it fits well.
I agree. Allow me to state my opinion on the final scenes. It is the biggest cliffhanger I could imagine and left me with my mouth wide open. While I was expecting a cliffhanger, I didn't expect such a grave one, and that basically erases the identification character and leaves the audience in dark about what happened to Cooper and what happens to him in the Black Lodge. And the madness on Cooper's face, his mad laughter when he looks in the mirror and is reflected by the evil and eerie expression of Bob, just gave me shivers. He was acting so well, and also by the way he was talking and laughing, you could feel the evil had taken control of him. It is totally crazy to bring to your mind that there was a break of around 25 years between this season and season 3, and people had to accept this end for such a long time and probably tried to console themselves with plenty of fan fiction or whatever. I expected the end of season 2 to be open in a way that you can still build on it, but still complete enough to get accepted as a final of the whole series. That's a balancing act directors usually try to achieve when they actually intend to continue a series but don't quite know if they are able to. But this was very different.
Time for a short break and our second guest. He owned Laura's diary, loves to grow orchids, and unfortunately cannot leave his apartment. Nevertheless, he is our second guest, Lenny Von Dohlen, aka Harold Smith. Dear Mr. Von Dohlen, how did you react when David Lynch asked you to play Harold Smith in season 2? Can you tell us a little bit more about how the conversation went, how you were casted, or even about the filming?
Well, I can't tell you what the conversation was like, except that of all my cool friends, I was the only one who had not seen Twin Peaks. So when they offered me the role, I had to play catch-up quick. And so they sent up the VHS tapes. That tells you how long ago it was. And I watched all these tapes from the first season and up to where they were in the second season. So I was caught up, and I realized that it was like nothing I'd ever known television to be before. And so I was very excited about that and about working with Mr. Lynch, of course.
What do you think about your tragic character on Twin Peaks? He had the anxiety to go outside, and many can understand this even more in today's weird times with Corona. What do you think, why is Twin Peaks and your role so important for many people around the world even today?
This anxiety to go outside, which of course it does mean all sorts of new implications with COVID-19, and people, I think, will have a far more understanding of people in Carel's predicament because of what they've just experienced through the trauma of lockdown and all of that. And I think it's a kind of need to connect. And what Twin Peaks so brilliantly does is it pulls people in because, well, I can speak for Harold, there is a disenfranchisement about him because he's sort of trapped in this hothouse with his orchids and his books, and so I think people relate to that, and certainly people who contemplate getting on the Hollywood freeway flirt with agoraphobia all the time. Who would want to get on that thing sometimes? You know what I mean? I think seriously, though, that what I've gleaned from so many of the great fans is that Twin Peaks offers a solace that you can't really find anywhere, certainly on network TV.
Besides Twin Peaks, you have acted in a wide variety of films, like the cult classic Electric Dreams, in theater plays and classic series. You were even a voice actor in one of our favorite games, Red Dead Redemption 2. Which of your work was your personal favorite? And do you have a special anecdote that you would like to share with us?
Probably a movie called Billy Galvin, directed and written by John Gray. And I played Billy Galvin, and it was a father-son story, and Carl Malden played my father, which was a great thrill. And that experience from the first read-through, through rehearsals, through shooting, to everything was just perfect. It was an amazing, fulfilling artistic experience. And I made a very close friend from that experience and have many great memories. The character was so different from myself. It was more, I thought, like my brother. It was a little more emotionally constipated. I have the opposite problem. And so that was a challenge. And there was a scene at the end of the movie where father and son, Carl Malden and myself, are fighting. And we start kicking each other's cars. He kicks my car, I kick his car, and we're yelling, and it goes on like this, back and forth. Father and son, two hard-headed men. And we were taking breaks and walking over to this restaurant to wait between setups. It was very, very cold Boston night. And it struck me that this scene had to be about more than just what was on the page, more than even just what this movie was about. It had to be about every father and son, all fathers and sons. It had to have that kind of gravitas. And I think I felt that because I was playing with someone who had been in all my favorite movies, you know, A Streetcar Named Desire, or On the Waterfront. Oh, God, so many. And there we were doing this movie. And as we were taking breaks, someone yelled from this crowd that was watching us, "Hey, Carl, did you leave home without it?" And that was because Carl had done a commercial for American Express credit card. And it was a very popular commercial, and that was the tagline, you know. And I was just mortified. Here I was, this young actor, and I was feeling extremely defensive and protective of Mr. Malden. And I thought, don't you know who he is? Don't you know, why? How could you say this thing to him? And he sort of said, Lenny, calm down. This is just the way it is. They know me from that, and that's fine. It paid for my daughter's college, and so I bless it. So that was Carl, and it was a great lesson to me that night, and I treasure that memory.
That's the kind of podcast that makes you wish you spoke a little German. This podcast reminds me today of a small Mexican chihuahua.
Now back to Max and Florian for the next part of this wonderful podcast.
Next thing on the weird list, there is the Cooper-Audrey romance. Good thing it was not carried out. However, considering that Cooper refused to sleep with a high school girl, and again this is picked up in the third season, it seems a bit creepy. More on that soon in one of our other parts. For this, Audrey had Jack Wheeler in season 2, the idealized fantasy of a swoony schoolgirl. There are so many scenes worthy of discussion. Leland's ending in the police station is one of them, but that's beyond the scope of this podcast episode. David Lynch himself often has ambitious views on the second season.
Maybe it worked for some people, but it didn't for me.
And then again,
in the second season, it got very silly and goofy. It got ridiculous. I stopped watching the show because it got so bad.
For me, the second season is again, or even more than the first season, made up of several parts that in turn make a whole. A wild ride, a dark view, but at the same time so blends satire of a small town, a soap opera with really pretty characters. I'm looking at you, Flo. You know which character we are raving about.
Oh, yes.
And partly a pretty emotional character drama. It's a quirky series full of quirky people. For me, I don't know how much sympathy I'll get from our listeners. Heather Graham as Annie is awful. A character seemingly thirsts into the show to give Cooper a love interest. Everything is so cheesily romantic, it hurts. The cliché boat ride, for example. A former nun after a suicide attempt. Well, Annie also arrived right as the second season starts to ramp up to the big final. What a coincidence. The Miss Twin Peaks contest is not even mentioned by me. I find it ridiculous and overdone. Female characters become decals. Horrible. All appearing in an extremely old-fashioned context, even for the time. Cabaret costumes, wrapped in plastic. We know that from somewhere, don't we?
Yeah, and I felt like the soap elements outweighed the mysterious elements in many of these episodes. Some of the storylines were just redundant and plain stupid and led to nowhere. It feels like the directors didn't know what to do with some of the characters, so they made up over-the-top absurd storylines to keep them busy. But in my opinion, they lack the Lynchesque humor. For example, I was quickly annoyed by the Nadine superpower storyline, as well as the Benjamin Horne insane Civil War storyline, even though the latter one was funny and refreshing at the beginning, but turned annoying very soon. In general, both storylines felt way too long and repetitive. Moreover, some annoying and dull characters were introduced that didn't quite fit the charm of Twin Peaks. You mentioned Annie before, but she's got a male counterpart in John Justice Wheeler, who was also only introduced to distract Audrey from Cooper, because nobody would have liked to see an affair between Audrey and Cooper. Billy Zane is just like a blank sheet of paper. He is handsome, successful, and that's all you can say about him. He's intangible, has no rough edges, and hardly any interesting character traits.
Now let's discuss some absurd scenes from season 2. First one is Catherine Martell become a Japanese man. Jesus Christ, Piper Laurie's name disappeared from the series credits for a while. Meanwhile, a Japanese businessman named Mr. Tochimura arrived at the Great Northern and tried to buy a property owned by Benjamin Horne. After a few episodes, it turned out that Tochimura was Catherine herself, disguised as a transgender and hatching an overly complicated revenge plot against Ben. Another one of those what the fuck moments.
Talking about what the fuck moments, in the very first episode of season 2, there's the old room waiter in the hotel, the Great Northern, who finds Cooper being shot on the ground full of blood, but he doesn't take the situation serious and instead asks, "How are you doing down there?" and doesn't call the doctor, even though Cooper asks him to do so. He puts a glass of milk on the table, and then when he is about to leave, he winks at him, gives him a thumb up and says, "I've heard about you." And he's doing this 3 times. Later, the old waiter returns in the Black Lodge, but it's never explained what his role is supposed to mean. The giant, who appears in Cooper's hotel room shortly after, tells him some cryptical sentences. The olds are not what they seem. It's probably the most memorable and famous. That was the moment when I realized things can go wild in season 2, and you have to focus on every detail and every symbol coming up in the series. Everything can bear a significant meaning, and suddenly you start paying attention to every holding of an owl and make interpretations of it and read something into it. The giant is like a guy who gives the starting shot for the Mysterious of season 2, and there are indications that the old room waiter and the giant are somehow in a relationship, but we don't know what it means.
The next scene is not absurd, it's quite interesting, especially for that time. David Duchovny played a trans woman in the storyline of DEA agent Denise Bryson, formerly Dennis, who discovers during an undercover assignment that he or she prefers to dress and present herself as a woman. Twin Peaks was ahead of this time. Cooper immediately accepted his old friend's new name and clothing change. Local cops followed his lead, and even Audrey Horne, who mistakes Denise for a same-sex woman, got proof that even she could one day become a federal agent. And now back to an absurd scene, James and the femme fatale. As said before, this film noir storyline, James Hurley trying to escape Twin Peaks and its many tragedies, becomes the fall guy for an icy blonde who wants to murder her wealthy husband. It's played absolutely straight and is probably the most boring thing Twin Peaks has ever done. Even in the Black Widow subplot, we could laugh, but this was just embarrassing.
Yeah, and another interesting scene that stuck into my mind was Albert Rosenfield's reconciliation speech to Sheriff Truman. It was only a short speech, but what it makes so bizarre is that it came out of the blue and turned an arrogant asshole townsman into a nice and friendly colleague within a few seconds. After that, his cynical comments have been funny now and then, but it really went too far a few times, and it bothered me since we've learned to take the sides of Andy and Sheriff Truman because they are some of the trustful faces in Twin Peaks. And then Albert suddenly comes up with a speech that sounds like a well-prepared Nobel Peace Prize winner speech in which he exposes himself as a pacifist and actually brings in Gandhi and King, which is so hilariously over the top, considering how mean he has behaved until then. The director simply turned an asshole character into a respectable man with a good set of values, and everything that happened between him and Truman before is just washed away and they become friends. Usually directors, when they want to change a character, they show it in a long-term process, but no, I want them to be friends right now, and one moment later he makes it real. But it doesn't feel wrong. Twin Peaks just loves to undermine our expectations.
I have only one sentence for that. Lucy and Deputy Andy in flannel suits while a weasel ran amok in the Great Northern Ballroom. Yeah, that's all I need to be said. The next scene is Shelley kissed Gordon Cole. And let's just say Lynch want to kiss Mädchen Emick, period. And I'm incredibly jealous of that to this day.
Yes, I agree. And talking about Gordon Cole, we shouldn't leave this unmentioned. The bonsai scene.
Bonsai!
Was another weird short scene starring Gordon Cole, who is in the office of a police station talking to Cooper when he suddenly spots a bonsai tree that has been secretly gifted to the station, or to the sheriff's station, a while ago by Windom Earle, who hid a bug into the plant to be able to listen to the discussions going on there. Gordon asks Cooper if he remembers the old World War II movies, bends over to the bonsai and screams, "Bonsai!" so loudly that Windom Earle got his ear aching. And when you know how loudly Gordon speaks, you can imagine how loudly he shouts. In the moment, I thought Gordon Cole must know about the bug Windom Earle put in the bonsai, but then I concluded it's just Gordon Cole's quirky humor, his talking random chit-chat, and one of the typical unexplainable things he used to do.
Yes, and don't get us wrong, we love Twin Peaks. We love the whole Twin Peaks experience, but season 2 is a little bit special. And now a moment you've all been waiting for. He loves to play chess, has a soft spot for the winner of the Miss Twin Peaks contest. His mind is like a diamond, cold, hard and brilliant. And he's our last guest for today. Windom Earle himself, Kenneth Welsh.
How did you react when David Lynch asked you to play Windom Earle in season 2? And can you tell us something about the filming?
In fact, I did not audition for David Lynch. I'd never met the man. I'd seen Eraserhead and I had heard of him, of course. But no, when I was in Los Angeles shooting a film, I was prompted to call my old friend Bob Engels, who was apparently one of the writers of the show at that. I had no idea. And so I called Bob, and he said, "Oh, Ken, funny you should call. I'm working on this series, and there's a new character coming up, and you'd be perfect for it. Can you come out on the set and meet a few people?" So I said, sure. So I went out there And Bob, took me around, and I met Mark. I think I'd met Mark a few times in a few years earlier when I was at the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, working on stage there. And so we walked around a little bit. I met the costume person. No David Lynch. And then Bob said, well, Ken, how'd you like to do this part? I thought, what? Okay. And I had no idea about the series. I'd never seen it. And so I started looking at old, episodes, and pretty soon I was on my way to do episode 1. And the filming of it was pretty much fun because, as I say, I had no idea where this was going. I merely followed the lead of, Bob and Mark, who were the writers of the show. And so I was always interested and excited to see where this character was going. And I could build it step by step as I went along with the help, of these two wonderful writers, producers. So to me, it was a pretty exciting adventure from that point of view, just discovering this character in a maze, in a world that I had no idea about. So it was a lot of fun.
You said that the Windom Earle character is one of your all-time favorite roles. Why is that so?
Well, I think there's a number of points of view I could have about that, but mainly it's because it was like a playground for me, the way that it was basically engineered by my friend Bob Engels, who knew me very well. And he knew that, I was the kind of actor who liked to bring things to a role, like different accents and different looks and different behaviors and everything, because I've always been like a character actor, and I've loved doing that kind of thing. And he even would, like, for example, Bob wrote in one of the episodes where Windom is playing his flute. I said, okay, well, let's change it a little bit, Bob, because I do play the flute, but because he knew I played the flute. And I also played this shakuhachi, this Japanese wooden flute, which was used, I think, by the samurai as a weapon or something at one point in the history of Japan. I'm not really sure about that, but anyway, I said, well, why don't I play the shakuhachi? And then I beat Leo with it. That would be a very Windom thing to do. He said, Ken, that sounds great. So I guess Diane Keaton was directing that, and she thought it was a great idea. So that kind of thing, where I was allowed to be part of the process of invention for this character, and the journey was always something new. I something unexpected every week that I would, or every episode rather. It wasn't actually weekly. It was, we took longer time to shoot them than that. But there was always something new to explore every time I came back to the set to tackle Windom's adventures.
Back to David Lynch. Working with him is sure a big honor for any actor out there. He has made you to one of the most famous villains in the television history, and you also represented your role as Earl at the Twin Peaks UK Festival in 2019. Why do you think people still love the show and your character so much today?
Yes, back to David Lynch. Yes. It was an honor to work with David. I mean, I gradually knew more about him as we progressed during the filming. He didn't actually direct any of the episodes I was in until the very last one, when we kind of went through the red curtain and all kinds of strange things happened with characters speaking backwards and so forth. And it was thrilling, actually, because David was a very inventive director, and he would just suddenly change his mind about something, and he'd say, let's do this instead of that. Again, feeding into the way I was approaching this character with a certain sense of adventure and invention at the same time. So I really enjoyed that last episode. I can remember specifically, like David, I'd stolen this truck from another character, and I was driving the Miss Twin Peaks, Heather Graham, with me to this location somewhere. And David said, Windom, I don't remember what the other line was, but here's what I want you to say. Just say, just smash your face into the truck window and say, oh, look, 10 rainbow trout, in the back of the truck. And then we were, doing the scene, we were walking towards the red curtain, and he said, Windom, you carry a flashlight. And all right, when you speak, you turn the flashlight on yourself, and then when Heather speaks, you turn it on her. Okay? Oh, these actors are great. Let's go. He was kind of a wacky, fun kind of person David was, and that was the only time I really encountered him was in that episode, and I appreciated very much working with him at that time. And I guess the show continues to be successful because it was so interestingly and creatively put together, and so kind of the beginning of so many bizarre television series, but it was kind of like was the anchor to many of the ones that followed, because its storyline was very imaginative and rich in detail, and characters are so, fabulously dimensional. So I don't know, it lives because it had so much beautiful energy, and everybody loved doing it so much, I think. And, Windom, of course, it was a character who, I don't know, he just stood out as this kind of arch villain who had a great sense of humor, as I recall. So there you go.
Besides Twin Peaks, you have acted in a wide variety of films and series, including Legends of the Fall, The Day After Tomorrow, The X-Files, which would never existed without Twin Peaks, one of my favorite films, The Void, and many others. Which of your work was your personal favorite, and do you have a special anecdote that you would like to share with us?
And I think, no, all of them have been. All the TV series and all the films I've done and all the plays I've been in have all been very, very wonderful experiences for me, because that's what I've been all my life as an actor, and I've loved doing all of it. And I love that, the films I've done have taken me all over the world. I mean, I've shot films in the U.S. and my own country here in Canada and practically every city in this country. I've shot films in, say, England and France and Germany and Croatia, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, many, many places that I would love to travel to and just see. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone. I guess that, there's one film that I think is very timely right now, and that is The Day After Tomorrow, because of, global warming. And I think Roland Emmerich was very insightful in creating this film when he did. I guess it was like in the mid-2000s or so. And I remember that there was one incident where I was in my hotel room, and apparently he wasn't quite pleased with. We'd done one scene. He wasn't quite pleased with the actor who was playing the president, and so I don't know. I got this call in my hotel room. It said, "Hello, Ken. This is Roland here. We're changing the plot slightly. The president is going to be killed on his way to Mexico, and would you like to become the president? Would that be okay with you? Do you have a few extra days you can spend with us here?" I said, "Absolutely, Roland. Sounds like a good plan to me." I mean, I was sorry that that he had replaced the other actor, but suddenly I became the president. And that's how that happened, that I was elevated from vice president to president. And it was great because, not only was it more for me to do in the film, but it meant ultimately I got, a little more money, and I got more residuals later on, which was quite a treat for me. So it was a wonderful film from many points of view, but I've done lots and lots of other ones that I've liked so much. When I did The Aviator, I remember I did this one scene, very short, just part of a family scene. But I remember when Leonardo arrived at the house, of the house where I was living and with the family, and the dog came out and jumped up, and he had his head right in Leonardo's crotch. And I just improvised the line. I said, "Don't worry, he's had his lunch." Anyway, okay, that's enough of that story.
Have you seen Twin Peaks: The Return? And if so, what do you think of it?
Have I ever seen the remake of Twin Peaks? No, I never have. I've never seen it. I don't know. I wasn't asked to be in it, so I guess I didn't care. No, I'm kidding. Actually, no, I don't watch. I don't watch much TV. I certainly don't watch series television, believe it or not. But except I watch TV to watch sports, or to maybe watch a film on Turner Classics or something like that. But so I have not actually seen it. Maybe someday I'll try and find it on Netflix or something. Anyway, it's been fun, and I wish you well, and everyone who listens, I wish everyone well out there. Bye.
My stomach is filled up with a team of bumblebees. I can hear you loud and clearly. And I plan to write an epic poem about this gorgeous podcast.
And that's it, folks. Our second part of the Twin Peaks special from Flax the podcast. Our next part is out on the 1st January next year. Thank you for listening and take care. Goodbye from me, Max.
And Flo.
Bye.
Bye.